Our friends at Future 42 are out with a brand new poll in the governor's race. We are the first ones, as an ambassador to Future 42, I better be the first one to have access to it. And it is good news, again, for the Dave Reichert camp. I mean, when you really think about, and look, are polls the end-all be-all? No. We are almost a full year away from the 2024 election, but certainly when it comes to fundraising, when it comes to how a candidate is positioned, polls are very important. And also keep in mind that Bob Ferguson is in a fundraising blackout. And so polls like this at a time when he can't raise money, it's also interesting timing. So the poll from Future 42 shows Dave Reichert at 39%, and this is in a head-to-head contest when the other candidates in the race are not considered by the individuals who are surveyed. Reichert ahead 39% to Bob Ferguson's 35%. You'll remember that the first poll that came out in the governor's race, which was from a progressive polling institute, put Dave Reichert just 2 points ahead, so this certainly widens the gap a little bit, although it is still within the margin of error, which is plus or minus 5.5%. But I can't imagine that those are numbers that Bob Ferguson's camp is particularly excited with. I'll just say with their polling methods, they polled 500 Washington voters. They matched them up to demographics, so it was reflective of the state, and the polls were conducted between December 9th and December 13th. So obviously there are more people in the race still than just Dave Reichert and Bob Ferguson. So when surveyed, including the other two leading candidates in the race, here's how things shook out. I will note 37% undecided. That's a huge chunk to be undecided, especially when you have two people with some pretty good name recognition. I want to meet the person who's undecided between Bob Ferguson and Dave Reichert. You know what I mean? Like, I want to meet that person, although that could reflect someone who's undecided between, say, Semi Bird and Dave Reichert, who hasn't made up their mind yet, so that would still be reflective in there. So 27%, if you're looking at a four-way race, 27% for Dave Reichert, 28% for Bob Ferguson, just 5% for Semi Bird, and 3% for Senator Mark Mullet, a moderate Democrat. Some other interesting information that I thought I'd share with you guys in detail, because suburban voters are kind of considered like that's who you want to go after, right? Because they tend to be more apt to be swing voters, independent voters. So Dave Reichert, according to this poll, holds an advantage in suburban and rural areas, and Bob Ferguson holds an advantage in urban areas. I don't think that's a particular surprise. But if you look at GOP voters right now, 75% say they would vote for Dave Reichert. 48% of independents, that's the key there, say they would vote for Dave Reichert versus just 26% of independents for Bob Ferguson. Urban voters, only 29% say they would favor Dave Reichert. Suburban voters, 42%. I think one of the keys here is Dave Reichert is winning suburban women by quite a big margin, 41% to 25% for Bob Ferguson. And suburban women, I mean, there's a big chunk undecided there, 34%, but suburban women, these are the women who have in the past, really prioritized the issue of abortion access. And so maybe that's an indicator that Dave Reichert isn't turning them off as much as some would like you to believe. Okay, on favorability, and this will go outside the governor's race for just a moment, no one in politics in our state has particularly good favorability. One thing I want you to pay attention to here, because I think it's interesting. So both Dave Reichert and Bob Ferguson essentially break even on favorability, but far fewer people know who Dave Reichert is, which I actually think is interesting, because when you look at like the 19% who don't know who Bob Ferguson is, when people do know who he is, they don't like him. You know what I mean? Right. So it almost hurts Bob Ferguson because people know who he is, but they also don't like him at a much higher percent than Dave Reichert. I thought that was interesting. Democrats in the legislature with they're -3, they're 3 points under on favorability. Governor Jay Inslee, 9 points under on favorability. Republicans in the Washington legislature, 22 points under on favorability.
That's a tough place to be, though, because they can't get much
They can't do anything good, but they can't do anything bad. And it's also, I think, reflective of sort of national politics and sentiments around Republicans in Congress, perhaps. But it does put them in a pickle, because it's like, well, what do you mean we only 30% view us favorably and 52% are unfavorably? Like, we're in the minority. And so maybe people don't see them pushing through anything. And they're like, well, what are they doing? Well, they can't do much, right?